In the late hours of a Tuesday evening, the digital records of a city's life continued their silent, ceaseless accounting. Automated systems logged transactions. Network routers time-stamped data packets, and security cameras blinked in the darkness, recording the mundane choreography of urban existence. It was within this invisible ledger of ones and zeros that the first and last record of Amelia Vance's final journey would be written, not in clear text, but in a cryptic language of shadows and digital noise that would confound investigators for years to come. The question was never simply where she went, but how the only visual evidence of her departure could manage to reveal so little yet suggest so much. Amelia Vance was a creature of habit and precision. At 28 years old, she was an architectural drafter for a prestigious downtown firm, a job that perfectly suited her meticulous and organized nature. Her life was a blueprint of well-laid plans and carefully executed steps, from her career ambitions to her personal routines. She was the kind of person who set 3 alarms each morning, not because she was a heavy sleeper, but to ensure she could enjoy a quiet cup of tea before her workout without ever feeling rushed. Her apartment, a modest but immaculately kept 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of the Northwood Terrace complex, was a reflection of her personality. Books were arranged by genre and then alphabetically by author. Her kitchen spices were labeled with a small machine she had purchased specifically for the task. Nothing was out of place, because in Amelia's world, a tidy space equated to a tidy mind, and a tidy mind was essential for the complex geometric calculations and spatial reasoning her job demanded. She was more than just organized. She was deeply and demonstrably kind. Colleagues at her firm, Kellerman and Associates, remembered her as the one who always brought in baked goods for the team on deadline days. She volunteered on weekends at a local animal shelter, her quiet patience making her a favorite among the more timid and frightened rescues. Her younger sister, Chloe, looked up to her as a second mother, a constant source of steady advice and unwavering support. The last day of her known existence, Tuesday, October 14th, began as any other. She woke at 5:30 in the morning, went for her customary 3-mile run around the adjacent city park, and was at her desk by 8 o'clock, a full hour before most of her colleagues. She spent the day finalizing a set of schematics for a new commercial development, a project she had poured countless hours into and was immensely proud of. Her project manager noted that she was in high spirits, excited about the upcoming presentation to the client. After work, she followed another well-worn path. She went to her usual yoga class, which ended at 7 in the evening. Security footage from the studio's lobby showed her leaving with a smile, waving goodbye to the instructor. From there, phone records confirmed she made a 20-minute call to her sister, Chloe. During the call, they discussed plans for the coming weekend. They were going to drive to the coast to celebrate their mother's birthday. Chloe would later recount the conversation to detectives, her voice thick with a grief that was still fresh and raw. She said Amelia sounded perfectly normal, happy even. They ended the call as Amelia pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store near her apartment. She told Chloe she was just picking up a few things for dinner and would call her back the next day. It was the last time they would ever speak. The following morning, Wednesday, October 15th, Amelia's meticulously structured world began to fracture. Her project manager, a man named David Chen, arrived at the firm to find her desk empty. This was highly unusual. Amelia was never late, and on the rare occasion she was ill, she would always call hours in advance. He tried her cell phone at 9:15, but it went directly to voicemail. By 10 o'clock, a sense of mild concern had begun to curdle into genuine worry. David Chen called Chloe Vance, asking if she had heard from her sister. Chloe confirmed their call the previous evening, but said she had not spoken to her since. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She immediately began calling Amelia's phone repeatedly, each unanswered call amplifying her fear. After another hour of frantic, unanswered calls and texts, Chloe left her job and drove to Northwood Terrace. She used the spare key Amelia had given her for emergencies and let herself into the apartment. The silence that greeted her was heavy and absolute. The space was, as always, perfectly neat. A grocery bag sat on the kitchen counter, containing a carton of milk, a head of lettuce, and a package of chicken breasts, all still cool to the touch. There was no note, no sign of a struggle. Amelia's laptop was on her small desk, powered down. Her pajamas were laid out on her bed. But her purse, which contained her wallet, phone, and keys, was gone. Her car, a reliable blue sedan, was still parked in its assigned space in the building's lot. It was as if she had walked out the door with the intention of coming right back, but had simply dissolved into the evening air. At 2:37 in the afternoon, a distraught Chloe Vance dialed 911 and reported her sister missing. The initial responding officers from the Northwood Police Department conducted a preliminary search of the apartment and the immediate vicinity. They found nothing to suggest foul play. On paper, it looked like a case of an adult who had voluntarily decided to leave. But to everyone who knew Amelia, that explanation was not just unlikely, it was impossible. The case was assigned to Detective Miles Corbin, a veteran of the force with 20 years of experience, and his younger, more tech-savvy partner, Detective Lena Petrova. They began their investigation by establishing a concrete timeline of Amelia's last known movements. The grocery store receipt, found in the bag on her counter, was time-stamped at 7:51 in the evening. Her apartment was only a 5-minute drive away. This meant she had arrived home at approximately 8 o'clock. The detective's first task was to treat the apartment not as an abandoned home, but as a potential crime scene. A forensic team was brought in to conduct a thorough sweep. They dusted for latent fingerprints, used chemical agents to search for any trace of blood or biological evidence, and carefully photographed every room from multiple angles. The results were frustratingly clean. The only prints found belonged to Amelia and her sister, Chloe. There were no foreign fibers, no unidentified hairs, no scuff marks on the floor or walls to indicate a struggle. The front door's lock showed no signs of being forced or picked. It was a pristine scene, which in itself was suspicious. A violent abduction should have left some mark, some evidence of chaos. A voluntary departure, on the other hand, did not align with the groceries left on the counter or the complete lack of communication. Detectives Corbin and Petrova turned their attention to Amelia's digital life, hoping to find clues in her communications. They obtained warrants for her phone, email, and social media records. Her online presence was as orderly as her physical one. Her emails were work-related or personal correspondence with family. Her social media was a wholesome collection of photos from hiking trips, pictures of her cat, and posts about architectural design. There were no secret accounts, no hidden messages, no evidence of a double life. Her bank records showed her last transaction was the purchase at the grocery store. After that, her accounts fell silent. Her cell phone's location data provided the last piece of the puzzle. The final ping from her device was registered by a cell tower that serviced her apartment complex at 8:13 in the evening on Tuesday. After that, the phone was either turned off or its battery died. The investigators began the painstaking process of interviewing every person in Amelia's orbit. Her family was devastated, unable to offer any explanation. Her friends described her as being in a good place, happy with her job and her life. No one could recall her mentioning any new acquaintances, any strange encounters, or any sources of fear or anxiety. The portrait that emerged was of a young woman who was stable, content, and thoroughly grounded. It was during the interviews at her workplace, Kellerman and Associates, that the first potential crack in this perfect facade appeared. While most colleagues spoke of Amelia in glowing terms, one senior drafter, a man named Mark Renshaw, seemed more reserved. When pressed by Detective Corbin, Renshaw admitted that he and Amelia had recently had a significant professional disagreement. Renshaw had been the lead on the commercial development project before Amelia was promoted and effectively became his superior on that specific assignment. He felt that some of her design choices were impractical and would lead to budget overruns. He had voiced his concerns to management, but they had sided with Amelia. According to other colleagues, the tension between the two was palpable in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. This was the first concrete lead the detectives had. A disgruntled colleague, a professional rivalry. It was a classic motive. They immediately began to dig into Mark Renshaw's life. He was a married man in his late 40s with 2 children. He had worked at the firm for 15 years and had a reputation for being ambitious and sometimes abrasive. When first questioned, Renshaw was cooperative but defensive. He freely admitted his disagreements with Amelia, dismissing them as typical workplace friction. He insisted he respected her talent, even if he disagreed with her methods. When asked for his whereabouts on the night of Tuesday, October 14th, his story became less clear. Renshaw claimed he had worked late, leaving the office around 7:30 in the evening. He said he went straight home, arriving around 8, had dinner with his wife, and watched television for the rest of the night. His wife, when interviewed separately, confirmed his account. However, she seemed nervous, and her timeline was vague. She remembered him coming home, but could not be certain of the exact time. Detective Petrova, sensing an inconsistency, decided to check the electronic keycard access logs for the Kellerman and Associates office building. The logs showed that Mark Renshaw had indeed swiped out of the building, but not at 7:30. His card was used to exit the parking garage at 8:45 in the evening, nearly an hour and a half later than he had claimed. This discrepancy turned Renshaw from a person of interest into a potential suspect. Lying to police about his timeline on the night of the victim's disappearance was a massive red flag. The detectives brought him in for a second, more formal interview. This time, the atmosphere was not cooperative. It was confrontational. Confronted with the keycard records, Renshaw's composure cracked. He became agitated, insisting the logs must be wrong. He stuck to his story that he was home by 8. Detective Corbin laid out the timeline for him. Amelia arrived home around 8 o'clock. Her phone went dark at 8:13. Renshaw had lied about his own movements during that critical window. Under pressure, Renshaw's story changed. He admitted he had not gone straight home. He confessed that he had been having an affair with a junior accountant at the firm and had spent that hour with her in her car in a nearby park before driving home. He had lied to protect his marriage, not because he had anything to do with Amelia's disappearance. It was a sordid and believable explanation for his deception. The detectives were skeptical, but duty-bound to verify his new alibi. They located the junior accountant, who, after being assured she was not in legal trouble, tearfully confirmed Renshaw's account. She provided text messages exchanged between them that evening, time-stamped during the period he was unaccounted for. Her story matched his perfectly. Mark Renshaw was a liar and an adulterer, but he was not a kidnapper. The lead had evaporated. With the red herring of the disgruntled colleague cleared, the investigation was back to square one. Weeks turned into a month. The local news had picked up the story, and Amelia's face was on flyers posted across the city. The police department offered a reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. The tip line was flooded with calls, but they were mostly from well-meaning psychics or people who had mistaken a stranger for Amelia. None of the leads panned out. It was during a routine follow-up interview with Chloe Vance that a new name entered the investigation. Frustrated and desperate, Chloe was trying to recall every detail of her sister's life, no matter how insignificant it seemed. She remembered that Amelia had a serious boyfriend the previous year, a relationship that had ended badly about 6 months before she vanished. His name was Julian Croft. Chloe described Julian as intensely charming and charismatic on the surface. He was a successful sales executive, handsome and confident. When he and Amelia were together, they had seemed like the perfect couple. But as the relationship progressed, a darker side of Julian had emerged. He was possessive, jealous, and prone to fits of temper when he did not get his way. The breakup, Chloe explained, had been Amelia's decision. She had felt suffocated by his controlling behavior. Julian had not taken the rejection well. He had bombarded her with calls and texts for weeks, begging her to take him back. When she refused, his messages turned angry and menacing. Amelia had confided in Chloe that he was starting to scare her. She had even blocked his number, but he had tried to contact her through social media and even showed up at her apartment unannounced on one occasion. This was the kind of information that made the hair on the back of a seasoned detective's neck stand up. A volatile ex-boyfriend with a history of obsessive behavior was a far more compelling suspect than a disgruntled colleague. Detectives Corbin and Petrova immediately shifted the entire focus of their investigation onto Julian Croft. They discovered that Julian had been interviewed by the initial patrol officers in the first few days of the investigation, but it had been a cursory check. At the time, he was just one of many names on a list provided by the family. He had presented himself as a concerned friend, telling the officers he had not seen or spoken to Amelia in months, and that their breakup was amicable. He had an alibi for the night of her disappearance. He was at home, alone, watching a movie. With the new information from Chloe, that initial interview now seemed like a calculated performance. The detectives pulled Julian Croft's file. He had no criminal record, but a search of civil court records revealed a past restraining order filed against him by a different ex-girlfriend 5 years prior. The petition cited harassment and stalking. The order had since expired, but the pattern of behavior was undeniable. Corbin and Petrova drove to Julian's upscale townhouse to interview him again. This time, they were not there to simply ask questions. They were there to gauge his reactions, to look for cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Julian answered the door with a look of mild surprise. He was impeccably dressed, his home stylishly decorated. He invited them in and offered them a drink, the perfect host. He expressed his deep sadness over Amelia's continued disappearance. He spoke of her in glowing terms, calling her a wonderful person. When Detective Corbin brought up the more troubling aspects of their breakup, Julian's expression shifted from concern to one of wounded indignation. He admitted he had been heartbroken and might have been a little persistent in trying to win her back, but he flatly denied ever threatening her. He maintained his alibi for the night of October 14th. He claimed he had gotten home from a business dinner around 7, changed into casual clothes, and spent the evening on his couch. He could not, however, provide any proof. There were no witnesses, no credit card transactions, no time-stamped communications to verify his story. It was his word against nothing. While Julian's alibi was weak, the detectives had no physical evidence linking him to Amelia's disappearance. Her apartment had been clean. His name had not appeared in her recent phone or email records. It was a classic he said, she said scenario, except one of the parties was missing and presumed to be the victim of a violent crime. The investigators needed something more, something concrete to tie Julian to that Tuesday night. Detective Petrova, methodical and persistent, decided to re-examine the digital evidence. She went back to Julian's cell phone records, which they had subpoenaed after the second interview. While he had made no calls or sent any texts that evening, the location data told a different story. His phone, like most modern smartphones, was constantly communicating with cell towers and nearby Wi-Fi networks to triangulate its position. His alibi was that he was at his townhouse across town from 8 o'clock onwards. However, the data showed his phone was in the vicinity of his home until approximately 8:20 in the evening. Then, for a period of about 90 minutes, the phone's location data went dark, as if it had been powered off. It came back online at 9:50 in the evening, pinging a cell tower several miles away in a semi-industrial area on the outskirts of the city. Then it showed a clear path of travel back to his home. The 90-minute gap was suspicious enough, but the location where the phone came back on was even more so. It was a desolate area, home to warehouses, vacant lots, and a municipal waste transfer station. It was not a place someone would go for a casual drive. When confronted with this new evidence, Julian had an explanation ready. He said he had fallen asleep on his couch and, upon waking up, realized he had left an important work document in his car. He claimed he drove to his office to retrieve it, realized he had forgotten his access card, and then drove home. The industrial area, he said, was just on the route to his office. It was a flimsy excuse, but once again, it was impossible to disprove without more evidence. The detectives felt they were being played by a smooth and practiced liar. They were convinced Julian Croft was involved, but their conviction was not evidence. They needed a breakthrough, a piece of irrefutable proof that would place him at Amelia's apartment or show him in her company. It was this desperate need for a new angle that led Detective Petrova back to the very beginning of the investigation, the location. She spent an entire day walking the streets around the Northwood Terrace apartment complex, looking at it from every possible angle. She was searching for something everyone else had missed, a silent witness that could provide the missing piece of the puzzle. She found it on the side of a brick warehouse across a 4-lane road from the complex. It was an old, weather-beaten security camera mounted high on the wall, aimed not at the warehouse itself, but diagonally across the street. Its field of view was partially obscured by a large oak tree, but it seemed to cover a small portion of the entrance and exit of the Northwood Terrace parking lot. The warehouse had been vacant for years, but the camera, part of an old defunct security system, was still connected to a power line. Getting the footage was a challenge. The property was owned by a holding company based in another state. After days of navigating bureaucratic red tape, the detectives finally got permission to access the building and retrieve the digital video recorder. The equipment was ancient by modern standards. The hard drive was small, recording on a continuous loop that overrode itself every 7 days. By the time they accessed it, more than a month after Amelia's disappearance, they knew the chances of the relevant data still being there were slim. But by some miracle, they were in luck. The system had malfunctioned. It had stopped recording new footage on October 16th, the day after Amelia vanished. This meant the recordings from the night of October 14th were still preserved on the drive. The detectives rushed the DVR back to the department's forensic lab, a palpable sense of excitement in the air. This could be it. This could be the moment they finally saw what happened to Amelia Vance. The video forensic analyst, a man named Kenji Tanaka, carefully extracted the data. The footage was exactly what they had feared: low resolution, grainy, and shot from a great distance. The camera recorded in black and white, and the poor lighting of the parking lot at night made it difficult to discern fine details. To make matters worse, the video file for that evening was corrupted in several places, causing it to skip and freeze intermittently. Tanaka worked for hours, cleaning up the image as best he could, stabilizing the shaky frames, and adjusting the contrast. Finally, he called Corbin and Petrova into the darkened lab to show them what he had found. He had isolated the relevant time period from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the evening. The screen showed a static, blurry view of the parking lot entrance. Cars came and went. their headlights washing out the image for a few seconds each time. Then, at 8:27 in the evening, a dark-colored sedan pulled up to the exit gate and stopped. The shape and model of the car were consistent with Julian Croft's vehicle, a black luxury sedan. It was impossible to be certain due to the poor quality, but it was a match. The car sat there for almost a full minute, unmoving. At 8:28, the driver's side door opened, but the driver remained inside, only a dark silhouette visible. A moment later, a figure walked into the frame from the direction of the apartment building. The figure was slender, with long hair, matching Amelia's general description. The person walked directly to the passenger side of the sedan. This was the critical moment. The detectives leaned in, their eyes glued to the screen. The figure opened the passenger door and got inside. There was no visible struggle, no sign of coercion. The movements appeared fluid and voluntary. The door closed, the car's brake lights flashed, and it slowly pulled out of the parking lot, turning right and disappearing from the camera's view. Corbin let out a sigh of frustration. "She got in willingly," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It looks like she knew the driver. Maybe she did just leave with him." It was a plausible scenario. Perhaps she had decided to give Julian another chance and left with him, and something catastrophic had happened later. But Petrova was not convinced. "Wait," she said, pointing at the screen. "Kenji, can you play that back, right before the car pulls away?" Tanaka rewound the footage and played it again in slow motion. The car was stationary. The passenger was inside. Then, for a fraction of a second, an interior light seemed to flash on inside the car. It was likely a glitch in the corrupted file, a momentary burst of digital static. The flash illuminated the car's interior for no more than 2 or 3 frames. It was not enough to see the driver's face or get a clear look at the passenger, but it was enough to reveal something in the back seat. A large, dark shape was lying across the rear bench. It was indistinct, a blob of dark pixels against a slightly less dark background. "What is that?" Petrova asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tanaka zoomed in, the image dissolving into a mosaic of blurry squares. "I can't be sure," he said. "The resolution is too low. It could be anything. A shadow, a piece of luggage, a pile of clothes." Corbin stared at the shape. "Or it could be a rolled-up rug," he said grimly. The implication hung in the air. It was a classic, grim trope of crime fiction, but one rooted in the dark reality of homicide cases. A body, concealed for transport. The theory was horrific. Julian had somehow incapacitated or killed Amelia inside her apartment, wrapped her body, carried her to his car, and then used her phone to lure her into a meeting under some false pretense, but that made no sense. The figure getting into the car looked like Amelia. The detectives and the analyst watched the clip over and over again, each viewing only deepening the mystery. The timeline was baffling. The figure who got into the car appeared to be Amelia. She got in without a fight. But what was the object in the back seat? And why did the figure who looked like Amelia get into a car that might already contain her own body? They considered alternate theories. Could the figure getting into the car have been someone else? Someone who looked like Amelia, perhaps coerced into playing a part? Or was the object in the back seat completely innocuous? A red herring created by their own suspicious minds? Could the flash of light itself have been a complete digital artifact, creating a shape out of pure noise? To get answers, they sent the footage to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's elite forensic audio, video, and image analysis unit in Quantico, Virginia. The FBI's experts had access to the most advanced enhancement software in the world. If anyone could pull a clear answer from that grainy file, it was them. The detectives waited for weeks, their entire case hanging in the balance. The report that came back was a crushing blow. The FBI analysts confirmed that the vehicle was highly consistent with the make, model, and color of Julian Croft's car, but they could not make a positive identification of the license plate, which was completely washed out by the glare of the taillights. They confirmed that the passenger appeared to enter the vehicle without apparent duress, but noted that the low frame rate and video corruption could easily obscure a brief, subtle act of coercion. Regarding the most crucial piece of the puzzle, the shape in the back seat, the report was maddeningly inconclusive. The analysts were divided. Some believed it was a non-human object, such as luggage or a duffel bag. Others argued that its dimensions and density were consistent with a human form wrapped in fabric or plastic. A third group concluded that the video quality was simply too poor to make any determination at all. The flash of light was deemed an anomaly, likely a data error, that made any analysis of the object fundamentally unreliable. The security footage, which had promised to be the key to the entire case, had become its central paradox. It was a Rorschach test in black and white. It could be interpreted as evidence of a voluntary departure or a sinister abduction, depending on how one chose to look at the shadows. For the district attorney's office, this ambiguity was a death sentence for the case. The lead prosecutor met with Corbin and Petrova and laid out the situation in stark terms. They had a strong suspect with a motive and a history of obsessive behavior. They had a lie about his alibi and suspicious cell phone data. They had a video of a car that looked like his at the scene, but it was all circumstantial, without a body, a murder weapon, a confession, or a clear, unambiguous video of the crime. No jury would convict. The defense would tear the video apart, highlighting the conflicting expert opinions and the poor quality. They would argue that the figure getting into the car was Amelia leaving of her own free will, and the shape in the back was a shadow. Julian Croft would walk free, and the prosecution would look incompetent. Reluctantly, the district attorney declined to file charges. The investigation stalled. The case file, now inches thick with reports, interviews, and forensic analyses, was moved from the active board to a filing cabinet. It remained open, but for all practical purposes, it had gone cold. Julian Croft, through his lawyer, released a statement proclaiming his innocence and decrying the police department's misguided and harassing investigation. A few months later, he sold his townhouse and moved to a different state, effectively vanishing from the lives of everyone involved. For Amelia's family, the lack of resolution was a unique and relentless form of torture. Her sister, Chloe, and their parents were left in a state of limbo, unable to mourn properly because there was no body to bury, no final confirmation of her fate. They were haunted by the knowledge that the man they believed was responsible for their daughter's disappearance was living his life freely. The security footage became a source of obsession for them. Chloe requested a copy from the police and watched it hundreds of times, staring at the grainy figure of the woman who looked like her sister. She would pause on the frames where the light flashed in the car, trying to will the pixels into a clear image, searching for an answer that wasn't there. Sometimes she believed the figure was Amelia, alive and leaving by choice. Other times, she was convinced it was a trap and that the dark shape in the back was the terrible truth. The ambiguity was its own kind of prison. Years passed. The world moved on. New cases consumed the time and resources of the Northwood Police Department. Detectives Corbin and Petrova were assigned to other homicides, other mysteries. Corbin eventually retired. Petrova was promoted to lieutenant. But neither of them ever forgot the face of Amelia Vance or the frustrating grayness of the video that had failed to give her justice. The case became a local legend, a cautionary tale among investigators about the limits of technology and the elusiveness of truth. Then, nearly 5 years after Amelia's disappearance, the phone rang on Detective Petrova's desk. The call was from a woman who had just seen a rebroadcast of an old news story about the case on a late-night true crime show. The woman's voice was trembling. She said she had information. She had been afraid to come forward at the time, but her conscience had finally gotten the better of her. The woman's name was Sarah Jenkins. In October of that year, 5 years prior, she had been a resident of the Northwood Terrace apartments, living in a unit on the second floor, directly below Amelia Vance. She was a night shift nurse and was usually asleep during the day and at work all night. However, on the night of Tuesday, October 14th, she had called in sick with the flu. She told Petrova that she had been in her apartment all evening, miserable with a fever. Sometime after 8 o'clock, she heard a noise from the apartment above her. It was a loud, sudden thud, like a heavy piece of furniture being dropped. It was so abrupt that it startled her. A few moments later, she heard what sounded like a muffled argument. The voices were indistinct, but one was clearly a man's and the other a woman's. The woman's voice sounded distressed. The argument lasted only a minute or two, then was replaced by a different sound, a scraping or dragging noise that moved from the center of the apartment toward the front door. After that, there was silence. Sarah said she was frightened by the sounds, but in her feverish state, she was not thinking clearly. She reasoned that it was just a domestic dispute and was reluctant to get involved or call the police. By the next day, when she learned of Amelia's disappearance, she was terrified. She feared the man she had heard might come after her if she spoke up, so she had remained silent, eventually moving out of the complex a year later. Sarah Jenkins' story was a bombshell. It was the first piece of evidence that directly suggested a violent struggle had taken place inside Amelia's apartment, something the pristine condition of the scene had failed to reveal. The thud, the argument, the dragging sound. It painted a horrifying picture that aligned perfectly with the theory that Julian had attacked Amelia in her home. Petrova felt a surge of adrenaline she had not felt for this case in years. She immediately pulled the old files and re-interviewed Sarah Jenkins in person. Her story was consistent and credible. She was able to describe the layout of the apartments and the specific location of the sound she heard. It was the break they had been waiting for. Armed with this new witness testimony, Petrova went back to the district attorney's office. She argued that Sarah's statement fundamentally changed the case. It corroborated the theory of foul play and directly contradicted the narrative that Amelia had left voluntarily. It provided a context for the ambiguous security footage, reframing it not as a willing departure, but as the final stage of an abduction. The district attorney was impressed but remained cautious. A 5-year-old auditory memory from a witness who was ill at the time would be difficult to present in court. The defense would attack her credibility relentlessly. It was stronger than what they had before, but was it strong enough? They needed to find Julian Croft and see if they could get him to break. Locating Julian was not difficult. He was living in a coastal city 1,000 miles away, working for a different company, but in the same high-level sales capacity. He had a new life, a new girlfriend, and had seemingly put his past behind him. Petrova and a new partner flew out to confront him. They did not announce their arrival, hoping the element of surprise would work to their advantage. They found him as he was leaving his office, walking toward his car in a parking garage, a scene eerily reminiscent of their first inquiries. He was older, with a few gray hairs at his temples, but he still had the same air of polished confidence. When he saw Petrova, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossed his eyes before being replaced by a mask of polite confusion. "Detective," he said, his voice smooth. "This is a surprise. It's been a long time." Petrova did not waste time with pleasantries. She told him a new witness had come forward, someone who had heard the struggle in Amelia's apartment that night. She watched his face for a reaction, for any sign of guilt. But there was nothing. He simply raised an eyebrow, a look of mild curiosity on his face. "A new witness? After all this time?" he said, a skeptical tone in his voice. "I told you then, and I'll tell you now. I had nothing to do with what happened to Amelia. I was at home that night. Your department cleared me years ago." His denial was as flat and unyielding as it had been 5 years earlier. He was a stone wall. The detectives pressed him for 2 hours in a local police precinct's interview room. They confronted him with Sarah Jenkins's statement. They went over the inconsistencies in his original alibi, the suspicious cell phone data, and the damning security footage. They showed him the blurry image of the shape in the back of the car, asking him one last time to explain it. Julian never lost his composure. He calmly and methodically offered explanations for everything. The witness, he suggested, was mistaken or seeking attention. The cell phone data was unreliable. The video showed nothing conclusive. He never raised his voice, never became agitated. He simply repeated his innocence over and over again, his gaze unwavering. It was a masterful performance of detached indifference. Without a confession, the district attorney's decision was the same as it had been 5 years before. The new evidence was compelling, but it was not a silver bullet. The case against Julian Croft was still circumstantial, and the risk of losing at trial was too high. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Julian was allowed to walk out of the precinct and return to his new life. For Amelia's family and for Lena Petrova, it was the final, bitter defeat. They had come so close, only to be thwarted again by the same fundamental problem, a lack of definitive proof. The case of Amelia Vance remains open to this day, a cold case file in a dusty cabinet, a testament to a crime that is all but solved in the minds of those who investigated it, but remains unproven in the eyes of the law. The grainy black and white footage from the warehouse camera is the enduring symbol of the case's tragic ambiguity. It is the ghost in the machine, a silent, flickering record of a young woman's last moments on Earth. It is a story with a beginning and a middle, but no end. The footage simultaneously holds the key to the truth and ensures it will forever remain just out of reach, lost in a haze of digital static and unresolved questions. The final haunting image is not of the car driving away, but of the indistinct shape in the back seat, illuminated for a fraction of a second. Is it a shadow, a bag, or is it the final, hidden resting place of Amelia Vance, a secret taken to the grave by a man who was too clever, and a camera that was not clear enough? The answer remains locked in those few corrupted frames, a permanent and painful monument to the absence of justice. The search for Amelia Vance never officially ended, but the hope of finding her alive faded with each passing year. Her family held a memorial service 2 years after her disappearance, a ceremony to honor her life, even without the closure of a funeral. They spoke of her kindness, her ambition, and the bright future that had been stolen from her. Her colleagues at the architectural firm established a scholarship in her name for young women pursuing a career in design, a fitting tribute to her passion and talent. Chloe Vance became a fierce advocate for the families of missing persons. She channeled her grief and frustration into action, lobbying for legislative changes to help law enforcement better handle such cases. She often spoke publicly about her sister's story, always ending her speeches with a plea for anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. She never gave up hope that one day a final piece of the puzzle would emerge and provide the answers she so desperately sought. Lena Petrova, even after her promotion, kept a copy of the case file in her office. It served as a constant reminder of the case that got away, the one that haunted her more than any other. On quiet nights, she would sometimes pull up the security footage on her computer, staring at the blurry figures, running through the endless permutations of what might have happened. She too was trapped in the video's ambiguity, forever searching for a clarity that did not exist. Julian Croft's life, in contrast, continued its upward trajectory. He eventually married his new girlfriend and had children. He became a respected figure in his community, volunteering for local charities and sitting on the board of a youth sports organization. To the outside world, he was a model citizen, a successful family man. Only a handful of detectives in a city 1,000 miles away, and a grieving family, knew of the dark shadow that hung over his past. They watched him from afar, powerless to act, holding on to the faint hope that he might one day make a mistake, that his conscience might finally betray him. But it never did. The legal system requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, a high standard designed to protect the innocent. But in the case of Amelia Vance, that standard became a shield for the guilty. The investigation was a textbook example of how a clever and careful perpetrator can exploit the gaps in the system. Julian Croft understood that without a body, the case was weak. He understood that without a confession, circumstantial evidence could be explained away. He gambled on the ambiguity of the evidence, and he won. The tragedy is compounded by the knowledge that the technology that could have solved the case instantly exists today. A modern high-definition security camera would have captured a clear image of the driver's face, the car's license plate, and the events unfolding inside the vehicle. A modern smartphone leaves a far more detailed and undeniable digital trail. But Amelia disappeared in a transitional era, a time when the analog world was giving way to the digital, and the tools of investigation were not yet as powerful as they would become. The story of Amelia Vance is ultimately a story about absence, the absence of a beloved daughter and sister, the absence of a body, the absence of a confession, and most critically, the absence of certainty. That absence is what allows a suspect to walk free, a family to live in perpetual limbo, and a case to remain frozen in time, forever unresolved. The grainy footage is the perfect metaphor for this state of unknowing, a permanent record of what can never be truly seen. In the end, all that is left is the memory of Amelia, a vibrant, meticulous, and kind young woman whose life was a carefully drawn blueprint. Her story serves as a somber reminder that justice is not always a guarantee. Sometimes, despite the best efforts of dedicated investigators and the desperate pleas of a loving family, the truth can remain just out of focus. A ghostly image on a forgotten recording, leaving only silence and the unending pain of not knowing. The question of what happened in the final moments of her life is one that, in all likelihood, will never be answered. If you found this case compelling, we encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us to continue shedding light on these important stories. Please also turn on notifications so you do not miss our next investigation into a case that deserves to be remembered. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and look out for one another.